All right, everybody. Good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm just going to bring Tom in.
Hey
Tom.
Hey, Luke.
Good to have you back.
Hope you had a nice stream last week with Nunu.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice not to have to code. That was nice. Yeah. How have you been?
Fine. Was a great week, and yeah, I looking forward to adding some new tests, and also happy to see what you've added to Pest the last 2 weeks. It always sounds like you would maintain Pest, but yeah, Nunu is the official maintainer, but you are the feature machine.
I'm the one that adds all the breaking things, and then yeah, Nuno's the one that goes and fixes them.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nuno. Yeah. Okay, 1 second. I'm gonna bring my screen in. All right. Yeah. So a couple of weeks since we last looked at the Opendor repository, and we have actually gone through a couple of minor patches on Pest. So I'm pretty sure last time we were on v1.12. So since the last stream on Opendor.me, we've had 1.13 and 1.14. So to go over the main features, in 1.13, Frake added the to be in expectation, which is kind of the opposite of to contain. So kind of just to throw in what that would look like. You'd have something like expect 1 to be in 1, 2, 3. So quite nice if you're dealing with an array of various values and you just want to check that what you're expecting on is somewhere in there. You're not too worried about where it is inside of that array. So that's a very nice addition. We also had the clean.
Short interruption. I've checked my calendar, and if the dates are right for the release, we were on 1.11. So even
right, okay.
1.12 were added.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. So 1.12 was nice. There are a few fixes gone in, and the force option as well. So if you're creating tests using the PHP artisan pest test command, you can now do -- force and it will overwrite even if it already exists, which is just a nice little feature to have if you want to start fresh on a file that's gone badly wrong. And also support for PHP unit 9.3.7, which is good. Something that Oliver and I have been working at in the background for quite a while is the output in PHP Storm, which is a little bit of a devil. So obviously when you run pest tests in the console, they always look really nice and you get this beautiful output. But previously, when you were using the built-in test runner in PHP Storm, things were a little bit ugly. Well, that's kind of been cleaned up a lot in 1.13. So you can see now we do get much nicer output, but you still get all of the links and error messages and everything you'd expect. So if I was to make this break, here we go. You get all of the nice error messages that PHP Storm offers. You've got your diffing and everything like that. You just get output that's a lot more similar to the Pest console output. So hopefully you'll feel a little more at home now if you're using Pest in PHP Storm. And then recently, as of 2 days ago, maybe, what are we on, the 5th? The 4th, as of yesterday, time flies. As of yesterday, we added the bound closure to datasets. And there is actually a test that we can demo this on. this finds users by email test. So obviously this has got a data set. We're running 4 tests. There seems to be a little bit of a problem with the output here. 1 second. Let's do it this way so we remove any distraction. There we go. Look, 4 tests. This example test is coming from PHP unit because Pest doesn't know how to handle the PHP unit in an only situation. But that's not a problem. It's this we're interested in. Yeah, so previously what we've had to do is basically just pass the email into with, which is fine. But there is actually a way we can use the new bound data sets to clean that up. So just to try and demo that and then perhaps discuss how we feel. We can come down here and I'm just going to open up my Opendor testing database conditions, which should allow this test now to actually run. Just imagine if somebody had forgot to launch Postgres. All right, let's launch that. Stop that. Cool. Okay, so run that again. Here we go. So we get the 4 passes, which is nice. But yeah, again, we're just passing an email in here, which means we have to build the user up using tap each time. Now, it's very much up to you as to whether you do this, but basically, now in Pest, you could pass a short closure here. And after passing the short closure, you have complete access to the test case itself. So again, perhaps not the best example of where to use it, but in this instance, we could say this user, if I spell your name right, gummy beer, and then you could call update and you could pass the different emails in.
But we don't pass the different emails to the user. We pass the different emails to the scope.
Even better then. So we can say user by email and just pass that email there in. And so now in the expect method, you're not going to receive an email, you're going to receive an instance of the user.
And is the data set resolved after the tab?
The data set is resolved. Yeah, it's a good point, actually, yeah, because the tap will happen first. Let me just run it, see what happens. Out of interest.
So now you will get an exception because argument 1 isn't a type of user.
Yeah. Okay.
And have you composer updated?
We're on 1.14. Might be a little quirk with higher order tests. I have to look into that. But basically, yeah. Okay, let's do this in a slightly different way.
But I definitely see the usage of these bound data sets. For example, sometimes I had the situations that I had to call the route function in my data provider.
Yes, definitely. And in fact, we're in a Laravel app here, right? So
yeah,
have we got any routes in this application? I imagine we have.
I definitely have somewhere.
So let's do route string route and then dump and die route, run that test. What have I done? I've still got only in here. There we go. So yeah, you can see we actually receive opendor.test, which is the resolved route, but in a data provider. And this works with shared data sets as well, which is really nice. So you can hide this away inside a shared data set somewhere, but in that shared data set still have full access to the test case. And something I was playing around with yesterday as well, which was quite nice, is I don't know whether you've done it in like in PHP unit, have you ever put like a bunch of base tests in a trait that you want to run on every form of a certain test, for example?
Yeah.
Obviously, in a functional world, we have to think of a different way to do that, because you can drop a trait in there, but you're going to have to write the tests in PHP unit syntax then, which is not a problem with per se, but if you
And with PHP unit, you don't have access to bound data sets.
Exactly, yeah. But just some I came across this. Sorry, Tom.
This problem has bitten me so often in my ass. So that you really can't use anything related to Laravel in a dataset. So no config, no route, no eloquent. You always have to pass the simple values and do the Laravel stuff in your test case. And yeah, it works. And it is what Pest does under the hood, I assume. But
yeah,
it's ugly to do it your own.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. So, I mean, what happens in PHP unit is it's just because the data set is being resolved before the test case is booted. And obviously, it's in the setup method of the test case that Laravel gets all of its features in tests. So the data set fails because of that. But with when you pass a closure to the with in Pest, Pest will wait to expand that closure until the test case has finished its setup method. So that's how this works, which is nice. And yeah, it allows you to access Laravel features. It allows you to do more complex setup. And there was a situation yesterday where I had I had something like this swap, and I wanted to. I had like 3 or 4 different instances in the container that I wanted to do the exact same tests against each time. So let's say this was like example class, and I wanted an instance of my class.
Yeah.
Like that. And then I wanted to do that, like, let's say 3 different times. But this one was another class. Oh. And this one was a 3rd class. Well, now this is going to be run 3 different times. You get 3 different tests. But each time you're going to have a different instance resolved into the container.
Could you show how the output of a failed bound data set test looks like?
Yeah, so this is something that needs a little more polishing output-wise, I think. But let me show you. So if we just resolve like 1, 2, and 3 data, and we'll say expect data to be false. But you can see you do get the real output, but when you're looking at what is in the with, you're going to get the closure. You're going to get the closure object. Whereas if this is obviously a plain data set, and you get the output of the actual data in there.
Okay.
So it's something that needs a little more looking at in the future, I think.
And can a bound data set return multiple values? So can you return an array which is automatically spread over several arguments?
Conversation I was having with Frake yesterday is let's get rid of the extra ones. At the moment, this is going to be passed in as an array. Right? So if I dump inside the array, data would be a better call there, wouldn't it? Yeah, if I dump inside that array, you can see that it is in an array format. What I was talking about yesterday with Frake is looking up the type hints and the number of parameters that you've requested, and then deciding whether it should be passed as an array or whether it should be spread across. So that's something that will probably be out in one of the very next versions of Pest. But for now, yeah, if you return an array from one of these functions, it's going to return the data as an array.
Okay.
You can read more about bound data sets in the Pest docs, get started, data sets, and then bound data sets. And you can see some examples that we do there. Very cool. Right. So I think you're up to date on Pest.
Yeah.
Everything.
One cool test, or not pretty cool, but super simple, I'm doing with data sets in several apps that don't have any test yet, is just passing every single get route as a dataset entry and do a simple sys get of this pest and route and expect 200, for example.
Yeah, that's a really good use case, isn't it?
This is a super simple test, and I bet that a lot of test-driven developers would say this isn't a test. But one thing you can ensure with this, if you don't have any other tests there, is that you at least can call every get URL on your page.
Yeah.
And you get a valid result. So you don't get any 500s, 404, or whatever. And yeah, so this is already a pretty good coverage if you don't have anything, because it doesn't give you a lot of detail what is failing, but at least it tells you if something fails.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I think if you were coming into a test suite that was a full-blown application and you were thinking, where do I even start with this? To be able to whip up a data set like that with all your roots in it, which you could probably actually do by copying and pasting the web.php file and then using a little bit of IDE magic to transform everything into an array. Very quickly, you could have built up a test suite that you can expand, and as you say, will at least tell you if everything is working or not.
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
One idea for bound data sets, is it possible to have the closure on top level? So with function and return the whole data set and not every single entry. And now return an array of 1, 2, 3, for example. And it will run a test case for 1 and one test case for 2 and another one for 3.
I think that's part of shared data sets.
Yeah, but these aren't bound to my application. So one idea, for example, would be to be able. Oh, wait, go back. Wasn't it data set? You have a function you can yield. Yeah.
Yeah.
This looks like what I want.
And the nice thing about that as well, if you're not familiar, obviously, I know you'll be familiar with yield, Tom, but if you're listening and you're not familiar with yield, is that's like lazily handled. So if you had a data set with 1,000, 10,000, however crazy you want to go, you could be loading in from a file somewhere or from an API somewhere.
Yeah.
It won't consume memory for all of those entries. It'll handle the entries one at a time, which is nice. So yeah. There you go. Question answered. Happy days.
Perfect.
Hello to Can and Nuno and Marion. Nice to have you with us. All right. So I was looking at where we got to the other day, or the other week, and work on this job, right? Updates user details from GitHub. And so going into the job itself, which is this one here, I think what we've tested is basically that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure what we've actually tested so far is down to this line here. Because nowhere in our test do we then say, well, what if they have extra emails at the user emails endpoint?
Yeah.
So I think we need another test that is able to mock this endpoint here.
I think one of the reasons is that this endpoint is the same for every user.
Okay, yeah.
Because it only works for the authenticated user. So it doesn't work this nicely for my current HTTP fake setup.
Yeah, because it's going to look in the fixtures, and it's actually going to look for an emails.json file directly in fixtures.
So we could make it a bit more complex, this fake setup. For example, if you check the if condition above in the update user details job. Exactly. So updating the emails only works if the user has a GitHub token. And if it has a GitHub token, this GitHub token is set as BRR access token on the request. So one relatively simple idea would be to just set the username as access token, for example, and use this access token as well to generate the path. But for the moment, I think we would do better adding completely new tests covering other jobs and other parts of the application.
Yeah. Okay.
Because this definitely is something interesting, but I don't know. Yeah, it will take some time, and I don't know how patient our audience is.
Yeah, because I think you'd have to. The other way you'd do it is obviously you'd have to like whitelist a series of endpoints or file structures that had one particular way of doing things, and then anything that wasn't in the whitelist would have to go via a different fixture set. Okay,
would also be an idea. Yeah.
Which one of these jobs deals with something a little less authenticated then? What have we got here?
So yeah, this one would definitely work.
Yeah, I like that one. Okay, let's go for PHP Artisan test, and we want it in the jobs directory, and it's called load user repositories test. Here we are. It doesn't have that page. So just looking how we've done this one here, obviously we're pulling in the job at the top. And then we have this dispatch sync, which is actually going to really run the job. So we're not faking the job or anything like that. We actually do all of the work.
Exactly. And we also don't depend on the queue driver defined in the PHP unit. We just want to run it.
Yeah. So that being the case, then let's say it, and I guess we probably want to say that it loads. We have already got a repos.json for Barry VDH, right?
Yeah.
So it saves the user's repositories. That'll do for now, right?
Yeah.
And to look at this job at the same time, we can kind of glean a few things. So we probably want to do this at first anyway, but we don't want Gummy Beer this time. We want Barry VDH, right? He has repos, unless you have a repos.json file that you can pull for yourself.
You can copy it. Just open your browser and go to api.github.com. /users/gummybeer/repos. Exactly.
Nice.
Select that then. All endpoints I'm using are public. You don't need any authentication.
Out of interest, because I saw something on Twitter that you'd kind of mentioned, but I didn't read it like well enough to decide whether it was about this or not. Are there like rate limits on the public API for GitHub?
Yeah. So without authentication, you have 60 requests per hour, which is enough for some playing around and testing and so on. Like this one, just getting the JSON of a specific endpoint. If you have a token, independent if it's an OAuth access token or a personal access token or whatever, you get 5,000 requests per hour. And this sounds a lot. And for all, and don't get me wrong, but all smallish repositories from PHP and Laravel world, and compared to some others, these are small.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really no problem. But as soon as you get to Index, Microsoft, Spotify, Shopify, CDNGS, CodaForge is one, for example, that also hits rate limits several times. These are repositories getting in real problems, or most time organizations as a whole, because the organizations own several hundreds of repositories. So between 300 to 800 or something like that. So already only indexing also repositories takes up to 8 to 9 requests. And now you have to get the repositories for every single of these repositories. So these are already 800 requests. And now most of the repositories don't have only 500 contributors, but like 2,000, 3,000 and up to. And yeah, this quickly sums up.
Yeah.
And there are also repositories with around 25,000 contributors, for example. And my idea was to replace getting the contributors, because this consumes the most requests of all, by native Git, because I can get the same information by running git log. I can get all the names, I can get all the email addresses and match them to my database. And it worked for playing around, like also the first MVP of Opendor itself. But also then you know which repositories and so on are kind of the trouble guys.
Yeah.
And you run the script for CDNJS, for example, and 5 minutes later you get the warning of your macOS machine that your disk runs out of space.
Okay, yeah.
And you check your file system and see that the CDNGS repository takes up to 130 gigabytes. And the repository itself is only 90 dot whatever gigabytes, so let's say 20. So all these 110 gigabytes are history, Git history. And if you check the CDNGS repository, you see that they have around 100,000 commits, and they get around 1 to 5 commits per hour. And yeah, if you have only one binary file per day changed, like images, for example, this quickly sums up.
Yeah, man. I suppose that's one of those things that, like, when you first build the application as well, you're not exactly thinking about, because you're like, well, who's going to use the application, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
it's the first time I've seen, wow, we have Microsoft on board. I said, crazy. And said I checked my queue and was like, yeah, everything runs through. And I checked the queue 1 hour later and have seen 4 failed jobs. And I said, shit. And yeah, 6 failed jobs per day are now my new 0, because these are the jobs I don't get around without really changing the code. These aren't failing because of some real exceptions. I definitely know what happens because it's rate limit, but it's something I don't have full control over. And I've done a lot to work around this, but yeah, somewhere there's a limit. And now I have to find new ways to get around it.
Yeah.
And one idea is now to have this Git log service, so a service that runs this Git log behind the scenes. But yeah, it seems like I have to do it 2 ways. So at first check the size of the repository, for example, and also the count of contributors. I don't know if I can get it, and decide on these informations which way I want to go. So if I want to go the Git log or the API way.
Sounds very entertaining. I'm glad I'm only writing the test suite. Hey to Steve, and hey to Frake. Marion asks, is that the default Darkly theme? What theme is this? You make a good point. Color scheme. Railcast's copy. This is. So yeah, I actually I've been using this quite a while now. I actually do like it. It's nice. I haven't changed theme in other than try and light theme for like 2 hours. I haven't actually changed theme for about a year and a half now, which I think is saying something. If you haven't changed theme for a year and a half, you must really like the theme.
Yeah, I've run the North theme before for around 3 years. And now I switched to Photon by Brent and originally by Mozilla. And yeah, I tried to convince you.
maybe yeah. I was too busy writing features for Pest to give it a thorough try out. I don't know how you feel about this, and some people will say you don't need to do it. I personally like to do it, and this is a really easy. Like we're going to come back to this, don't we? But it has the expected timeout. I think this is like an easy test that you can write and just check. So all I would do is load up a new load user repositories job. Obviously, that needs a user, so let's pass that in. And all I'm going to do is check that this public timeout property is set to this value here, right? And the reason I do this, and again, you can complain at me, Tom, if you disagree. But the reason I do this is if some other developer comes along in the future. Can we try to equal there? If some other developer comes along in the future, there we go, and they change this timeout, I at least want them to think. At least want them to think about it.
I won't accept the PR if they change the timeout.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I suppose this depends on like how the business works, and in open source things work a little bit differently, obviously. But let's say there's like.
Could you replace this user by simply new user?
I imagine we could actually, because we're never actually.
In that case, I would move this test to unit test.
Yeah.
Because this test doesn't need anything. It doesn't need a database, no HTTP, nothing. It just creates an instance and checks a property. So.
All right. That, by the way, in Artisan, in case you're wondering, if you're using the pest test command, you can just do --unit, the same as you can do for creating normal tests with PHP Artisan, and that will create a unit test version. So yeah, Tom is absolutely right. We can copy that, paste it here, and now this hasn't got to go through the container at all. We're going to get an error on. Huh. Is something happening inside the... Go back.
Check the parent of the job.
Of course.
Yeah, no. Also only copy and the job itself. No. I don't know what all these traits do, if they possible, but
surely they'd have to be like talked about in the constructor, wouldn't they?
But it complains about the eloquent model. Oh, it's a searchable trait on the model. Oh, damn.
Yeah, because it's doing it inside. Yeah, okay. In which case?
No. I think the searchable should be possible to disable. So here's a go up to the boot searchable. Yeah. Is there any register searchable macros? Okay, so model observer. Could you open some model observer linked in the error output? Yeah. What's this one? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's a little frustrating. I mean, it is what it is.
That's why I hate people doing stuff in the construct.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's tough because it's one of those things that it's easier to do it there most of the time, but it does affect things further down the line. And certainly, like using Laravel, I certainly tried to avoid using Laravel features in the constructor. But I jumped. To be fair, I jumped between full feature tests and then trying to make everything unit test to avoid having to boot Laravel. So even I changed from project to project.
Yeah. So let's move the test back to feature and live with it.
For now. Okay. So yeah, our first test passes. And again, like I say, some people would say you don't need to do that or like don't bother with that. Personally, I like to do it because it gives me an extra layer of security if something changes accidentally or someone else reviews the PR and they miss it. So it's a little bit of documentation, in my opinion. Obviously, we can make this higher order with an expect. And that would just need to be that. Now. Days. All right. Let's just check the chat. Steve's a light theme fan. Is there a nice way to use the Vilt stack? What's Vilt?
I think it's Vue.js inertia Laravel tailwind.
I don't see why not. I mean, it wouldn't obviously test the Vue side of things. I guess you'd just be testing the API endpoints with Pest.
Yeah. But I think that's what, with inertia, you don't have real APIs. So this is, I think, kind of problem Steve is facing.
Yeah, you just hit in. Does inertia ship with test helpers?
I don't know. I haven't used it.
Let us know, Steve. If inertia ships with test helpers, it might be worth looking into adding support for it, either in the Pest core or in the inertia core. So we'll have to have a look.
Another way to test it. Another way to test it would be with Dusk.
Yeah, which actually got PR into Laravel itself. Wouldn't it be nicer to put the timeout before to equal? Yeah, you can do that. Certainly. Yeah. You can do that.
And in that case, could we just do name it like job is properly configured, for example, and also check that the queue is set to GitHub?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just get, or do you want to? We might as well carry on using this. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just chain it and change the name. Should be GitHub.
Is it GitHub lowercase, or have you done GitHub with a capital G? Days. And was there anything else you wanted to check?
I don't know. Opens the job and
almost like I have to do my own work. Load user repositories. But yeah, you've set the timeout to. We extend GitHub job, which is obviously the reason why we can check that.
Yeah.
We've set the timeout. Don't think we're doing anything else as far as config goes. And I guess if you're checking that the queue is GitHub, we can infer that we're extending the GitHub job.
Obviously, let's check if the GitHub job does something really important. But no.
That's the override is this, isn't it? That's what we're actually like explicitly stating on our job itself.
Exactly.
So yeah. You can just do everything that Livewire offers you. Yeah. So like the reason I don't personally use inertia all that much. I've used it on like one project when it first came out, but I'm quite a Livewire fan just because it's in PHP and that's where I'm most comfortable. Yeah, Livewire works really nicely testing wise with Pest and Dusk as well, which Frake, like I was saying, Frake put a PR in the other week to Laravel, and I think you can just do -- pest now when you run the Dusk command, and it will run it with Pest rather than running it with PHP unit, which is nice. Cool. Okay, so now we need to do the actual job here, right? Let's come back to load user repositories. There's this paginated method, which is interesting. Obviously, doing a little bit of magic under the hood. So, what is this? Literally just going to go over the pages one after the other and keep getting the response? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for the most part we can ignore that because we're basically going to get the full response anyway, right?
Yeah. Kind of. So now we always only check page 1. And this is fine for testing the logic chained for the response, but for sure it doesn't test the paginated logic.
Yes, definitely.
So
out of interest, I don't know whether
testing the paginated logic could be a bit problematic because right now it depends on the count of results in the response, which isn't great. So
yeah,
we would have to define a JSON with exactly 100 entries and also add a second page. So for the moment, I think it's totally fine to test only the first page.
Yeah,
because it's more likely that the error is in the chained logic and not in the pagination itself.
Yeah, and to be fair, paginated is on the GitHub job itself. We might be able to come up with a job that is like a double inside the test itself that just generates a piece of JSON with exactly X amount of entries.
Exactly, yeah.
And we'll just test paginated once when we come to it. In this case, we are going to load user repositories, dispatch sync. That is going to load Gummy Beer's repos, which is this here. And I don't think there's is there a quick way in PHP Storm to see how many entries we've got here? I don't know that there is. But let's actually have a look, right? So we should be able to say this user repositories
Dump or count.
Yeah, I think I just count because I think we're going to get a lot of information there, aren't we? So let's just do that and run that job. 1.
That's not so much.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure you've got more than one repo. Okay,
yeah,
that's fine. Let's go through and take a look at what would cause.
Could you do this user refresh at first?
I didn't actually.
No, after the dispatch sync.
Yeah. So if we do this user refresh repositories, still 1.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay, let's just do jump and die the response here. Look at what we've got. So there are 30 icons in that array for sure. And then for each item in that array, we're doing this from GitHub.
Yeah, we would have to fake all the responses. Or? No, from GitHub handles the array.
Yeah, so we get the array.
But it could be that a lot of these repositories don't have a license and so we have some restrictions. So they aren't allowed to be private. They don't should be archived or disabled. They have to have a license.
Yeah.
And
still, we certainly get more than one passing that far. So then it's going to check the organization. You are a user, not an organization. So it's going to grab the owner. The owner should be you, right?
Yeah.
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 Days. So so if this is a fork of another repository, which again, I'm pretty sure most of them aren't. So if we were to dump and die here, we should get a bunch of results again.
Okay, and now, yeah.
Oh. Okay. So it seems that at this point, if I comment that out a second, yeah. So what's happening here, I imagine, is that most of those repos are forks.
Yeah, let's check it. So first one is the GitHub, which is excluded by name. Next one is a fork. No, not fork, but without a license.
Yeah.
Fork. Yeah.
If we search for fork true, 25 entries. And obviously fork false. Yeah, so fork false is only 5, and I bet 4 of those 5 have no license.
I should possibly clean up my repositories.
Okay, out of interest then, if we switch this to Barry VDH, I mean, this is interesting though. We've just seen the code work in action.
Yeah.
Okay, switching to Barry VDH returns 1 as well. Okay. Look, these are mocks, right? These are fake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find some fork is false or fork is true and change some to false.
Change some cool repos I want to own. Yeah, data transfer is okay.
let's just set the fork to false on all 25 of these, and then I can go back and selectively turn them off when I want to.
No, I wouldn't change it for all.
No, you want me to say that back? I can take that back. Okay. Have you got any repos in here that you're like, I wish I owned that?
Just click some together. I don't care. But because why I wouldn't change all to fork false is because in that case we wouldn't test the logic there.
True. Very true.
So
let's see how many that gives us. Still 1.
Yeah, do they have a license? The ones you have changed. So let's change the data providers.
Kind of want to get rid of fork faults. See, that one's there. Looking at it, fork faults, and it has a license. License. What are the other conditions on that? Using repository. Sorry, from GitHub, isn't it? Archived, disabled. Or data is. Oh, hold in. Oh, no, okay. See, that would indicate that this one here. So this is fork faults. And it's also. You know what else I'm going to do, by the way, just to avoid. I don't know whether this will actually even work with normal. Okay, it's not that. That license is MIT and that fork is false, which would indicate that that is the one that is working.
Adrian had a good question. Have you changed the username in the test case back to Gummy Bear?
I thought.
Or is it still Barry?
Oh, I think you're right. You know.
Yeah. Good one, Adrian. Good catch.
Okay, yeah. Now we have. Four. Now we have.
Okay.
Four. Happy days. Right. Let's close that down. So, at the very least, we could say expect that the repositories count is 4.
And I would do it repositories at the method, and in that case, you could remove the refresh.
Yeah.
So do the count database side. Yeah.
Okay. So the question now is, technically, we know that works. There's a bit of a reliance on our fixture, because we're basically saying that if you were to go and manually change that fixture again, this would break. So if I was to go and change another one to fork faults, that would obviously update to 5, and then we'd have to update our test, which isn't like amazing, but at the same time, I think it's something that we can focus on a little bit later. I guess what I would want to do is I would want to check that the details of at least one of those repositories was what I would expect it to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we grab the first repository, and I'll do that with database, we'll grab the first instance of an item from the repository. And I guess that should be coming in here, looking for fork faults, and then going to our very first instance and checking that this has a license.
It doesn't have.
Let's find the next one that does. Neither does that one. The cool thing about this is we're actually testing the other logic even without explicitly testing that logic. Like, if you think about it, while we're writing this test, by doing what we've just done, we've already checked that those instances further up, the first 2 instances that didn't have a license and never loaded in as repositories, we've not explicitly written a test for that yet, but you get that logic in this test. And if we were to change how things worked, it would break the test, which is really nice.
Exactly.
Like, completely free. Like, we didn't have to code that. You just get that for free. So sometimes, like, just thinking about what does this test actually cover helps you to understand when you need to write another test and when you've already written enough tests. Okay, what actually is inside a repository? Now, luckily for me, you are very good at writing these. So if I get this repo here, and we have a look at the name. Okay, so I'd expect the name to be, and I'll just check that that is indeed, yeah, property is name. So the name should be here, like that, right?
Yeah.
Run that. Okay. Well, that.
I know it's a full name, and.
Okay. Yeah. That's still interesting, though, isn't it? So where is this in comparison to this one? And is there some sort of sort? Okay. Isn't there a sorting algorithm on the repositories?
Yeah, could be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can have a look at that, can't we? Is there like a global scope, maybe?
Yeah. If so, it should be on the top, like a trait. No, it's
Lockable. Okay.
But let's see where the repository armor Archon class PHP is.
Just gonna do a little bit of windowception here, so I don't lose my place. So
if you would have line numbers enabled. I think it's appearance, yeah.
582 and 194. Right, okay.
Okay.
That is interesting. That is interesting. So at some stage, either we've got this wrong and this is actually not being imported. And I'll tell you how we could work that out, actually, is we could come back into our test.
It could be that it is imported, but not as the first one.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess why? There must be some form of sorting going on if that is the case. Let's grab the repositories and let's just map and grab.
You can call plug on the repositories. Yeah, so it's also possible, but I always like to do database side.
You're a database man. Okay, yeah, so it's
The
definitely in
air
there.
is in Atlas.
Yeah, definitely in there. So that the only explanation at this point, just looking through the. See, the other thing is, I was just thinking, is that alphabetical order? But then R is after L, and
It's definitely not in alphabetical order.
it's like opposite alphabetical order for the A's, and then randomly for the D's. Okay, so
Yeah.
so unless something really weird is going on with JSON encode, which I doubt is the case.
But that's
somewhere
definitely some of the proofs that you shouldn't depend on the order of JSON items.
No, exactly. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, we could obviously go and when we do this first, instead of doing first, we could do first where name and grab the one that we actually know is called gummy bear ear. Just
we
out
could
of
also
interest.
do some expect to be true, for example, or something like this, and do some sys user repositories where name for every single of these 4 names.
Yeah, you mean like as just loading them in one after the other?
Yeah, or do an expect on the line we already have. So sys user repositories plug name.
Yeah,
we could be a user expect.
talking about there, and then you could do
I think this is a bracket too much. Yeah.
Contain, and then you could literally. I wish I'd not deleted that now. 1 second. We could literally take the output here.
But I think it shouldn't be a to contain, but a to equal.
Yeah.
Because to contain only does a subset check.
That's true. I was kind of. Are we still saying that the order here is important then?
I think the order of items is only important for to be and not for to equal. Could it be?
I think that it's just going to use the assert equals in PHP unit.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that say? Well, let's try it. If we run that. Obviously, that's going to fail because of this expectation. Let's comment that a second. If we run that, and then let's drop that in there. Yeah. So that's
okay.
That's basically going to check the actual array contents. It doesn't have to be the same object. If it was 2B, it'd have to be exactly the same reference. It doesn't have to be the same reference, but it does have to basically have the same contents in the same order. To contain is or maybe to match array. There we go. Nice.
Oh yeah.
So then I'm pretty sure you could this is why wouldn't to contain work? Craig, you've been messing around with to contain recently. Am I doing something weird here? Because of the array keys, I'm pretty sure. I thought you could put multiple.
We could also do it another way and use higher order expectations and remove the to array call.
Yeah.
And now you can use the contains method of the collection. So plug returns a collection.
So yeah. So we could do that and then just call to be true.
I'm not sure if this works, but at least it definitely works if you do it for every single name. So I think this doesn't work. Yeah.
So you're saying to go over each?
Yeah, you could do it with a sequence or just copy the contains to be true 4 times. Or use each, yeah. But each doesn't work, I think.
No, because it needs to be the way. It's almost like we want the to be in. hold in. Yeah, we do want to be in, but you want to do each to be in.
But this also doesn't verify at the end, in theory, that all 4 names appear.
Yeah, true. Yeah, you would also want to say that each one is unique.
So personally, I would just copy the contains chained call with every single name and asserts that every single name is to be true. Yeah. But in theory, wouldn't the sequence be a possible solution here?
Well, kind of, but sequence is also order specific.
Yeah, but if we do a contains check on the collection, the order isn't important.
Sorry, Tom, I'm not following them, mate.
So I'm checking the sequence documentation, and yeah. So
you're saying to drop a sequence in here, yeah?
Exactly, and
but so I'm going to get each item sequentially there.
Yeah. So it walks over every item.
Yeah, so if I did that, it would be in the order that I passed that in. Which is fine if we are going to assert the order, but if we're not interested in the order and we're only interested in checking that the data is actually there, then that doesn't, all of a sudden, that kind of, we're enforcing order again. I mean, if we are going to enforce order, we can obviously just use to match array or even to equal and just drop the actual array in there.
Wait. Well, Adrian already said something. Is there and to equal cannot? There was something like to equal canonicalized. Yeah.
All right. Very nice.
Adrian said that he uses asset equals canonicalizing in PHP unit.
Let's just back this up then to that array. It's been faster just to rebuild the array, wouldn't it? To equal canonicalizing.
Yeah. No idea what it does, but Adrian said that should solve our problem.
Let's do array that. Ah, it does.
And now change the order, like dot files to the top or whatever.
Yeah. Ah,
perfect.
What a man! What a man!
I think you should call Adrian on the next stream.
Well, I could. That was next level. Nice, and very guessable name in Pest as well. Yeah. I to equal. See, the other thing is, I would expect canonicalizing to be like in canon, which would obviously, in my mind, say that it should be ordered. But thanks, Adrian. Awesome. Okay, so we can get rid of that. We now check that those actually do exist. And seeing as we actually grab this now, we can also say to have count of 4 here, which means you can get rid of that. We don't need that anymore. Still passes.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, get rid of that now. It's getting a little bit busy. Okay. So when we actually build this out, we set the name to the full name, set the description to the description. I wonder if there is a useful way, or rather, let's put it this way. Is there data here that you are interested in checking specifically?
I think with names, we already tested the primary job of this queue job.
Mm-hmm.
because now we really get into what should be tested on the repository itself. So in a from GitHub test, doing all these different combinations as a data set, for example. But I think this would be far too much for a test on the Q job.
Definitely, yeah.
Because the main job of the Q job is load this JSON response, put it into chunks, and throw every single chunk against the repository from GitHub.
And again, though, even without going into the depths of writing the lower level test for this repository job from GitHub, if you only wrote this test, you already do actually validate, without being specific, but you do actually already validate all of this logic here, because we only have 4 repositories out of the other side.
Exactly.
So it like, if you only get around to writing a single test in your application per job, per like class, you're still testing the majority of that class if you throw enough scenarios at it, which is why, like, this real world data, I know we've had to edit it slightly, but this real world data is really useful because it gives the test something more realistic to work with rather than some perfect world made up thing that we create.
That's also what I'm recommending to people starting with testing. Start with the highest level of tests. So like this, get your homepage and expect a status code of 200 and do some HTML checks, for example, like contains your brand name or whatever you want. And that's your first test. And you already test half of your application because you test the router, you test that your controller works. On the homepage, most times you have like 5 calls to different models because you want to get some counts and FHQs and whatever. And with such kind of tests, you cover so much. And all these lower tests, like unit tests, for example, are more to get more precise feedback of your test suite. So instead of it fails to render a homepage, it tells you this specific method fails.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so talking about the second half of that, then the last thing we'll do on the stream today is look at this from GitHub method in the repository, which is like diving a bit deeper. And rather than saying, well, we're assuming that this works, we can actually assert that this works. I think also we should just have a little celebration that we've got nearly an hour and 10 minutes in and my microphone has been okay. Like,
perfect.
I think that's enough that you should probably start drinking again or something. It should be that exciting. Like, oh, very nice. I agree, Adrian. We should definitely have an alias in Pest, more obvious. But yeah, thank you very much for pointing out the name. Saved our bacon. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's fire a test name out then. So just tackling this very first part, we know that if we call from GitHub and the data looks like, well, the data has any of these, which is perfect case for a data provider, then we should return null.
Yeah.
So we can say and it might actually be best to put this into a separate test case itself, but we won't abstract too early. Let's say the from GitHub method returns early if the data is invalid. So I'm going to receive, let's think about the best way to do this, right? Let's say we receive an array of overrides. And let's create a bunch of valid data up here. So let's say valid data is an array. We know that if private is false, if archived is false. If disabled is false. If the license,
And it has to be an array, I think.
That is an array. And in fact, let's go one step further. Let's jump back into our repos.
So important one is spdx_id. Was this one? Yeah.
Which is like the short name of the thing, right?
Yeah.
Which one of these would replace quotes? Yeah, no, that doesn't do it for all of them. Can I do it for all of them at the same time?
You can keep them PHP CS fix it will fix it.
Okay, so the license is like that, and wrong one, and the name is not GitHub.
.github and not the username.
So we'll actually put like gummy beer in there, right?
No, this would be problematic. Name it something like PHP minus library or whatever. It's the last larger OR condition. If the owner of the repository is of type user and the name of the repository equals the name of the user, the repository is also ignored.
Yeah, so we're going to create a little array like this with the owner, and we'll say type. We will make it a user because it belongs to you.
Yeah.
But the owner login, the owner login would be gummy beer, right?
Yeah.
2 M's, 1 M.
No, double.
Yeah, but because the name isn't equal to that login name,
everything is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Now,
so why I exclude these is so not set new, but relatively these repositories for users, allowing the users to have some cool profile information on their profile. Possibly you have seen it already. If you check some user profiles, they have this README block at the top of their profile where they can put whatever they want. So it's just a markdown file. And this has to be put into a repository named the same as your username. And because this is definitely not something open source, I just excluded.
Yeah, okay. So it's just work of working with the GitHub repositories. Okay, so basically,
Yes.
like the most basic check is if we array merge our valid data with our override data, which we're going to provide in a second, we expect the value to be null. I think as well, so that this reads nicer, I might put override as a sporadic argument, and that'll become clear of the data provider. All right, let's just trial this out. So we want to say with, and we'll data provider, and then we want to start providing some data. Now we're relying on PHP 8 here. I'm pretty sure that this will still work with array keys, but let's find out. If not, we might have to provide it as an array inside an array. But if we were to say private is equal to true, and just to see if this actually works, let's jump into the overrides and see what we receive. Okay, so it's been reset. That's fine. In which case, we can't do it in a sporadic way. We have to do an array of arrays. There we go. Okay. Let's move that down a little bit now, and I'll type that again. Test, and we pass. So the nice thing about this is we've obviously got the data that works. We can change one thing at a time, and we can have as many data providers as we want, or as many sets of data as we want. And we're just going to test for each different scenario and make sure that each scenario is actually going to work. So if archived is equal to true, for example, if disabled is equal to true, if the license is null, so license will set to null. If the name is equal to .github, and then this more complex one, which is still fairly straightforward, we're going to set the name to gummy beer, and then we're going to set the owner to an array where the type is user and the login is also gummy beer. Correct?
Yep.
Okay. Very nice. Very nice. So obviously with just the one test and a set of valid data, we're able to check all of these conditions. And if an extra condition came up in the future, adding to this test would just be dropping in another line in the data set and changing what's there. So you can use this for loads of different scenarios. I use this for validating requests, for example. This is like how I like to approach checking all of the validation methods in a request. I'll just pass it real data, merge it with some data that's bad, and then check that we actually get a single validation type or error. So there are different ways to tackle that, but that's how I like to do it. I guess the other thing is, obviously it returns null, which is great, but we also want to check that it never actually, where does it actually build the repository?
So repository is created, I don't know if it's really at the end, but yeah,
Store create. So I guess the only other test I'm thinking we want to do is we just expect that the user's repositories, or that the repository all to be empty, or you could do repository count 0. In other words, yes, I know that it returned null, but just make sure it didn't return null further down or something weird happened.
I think really readable would be repository exists to be false.
Very nice, yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So that test is obviously now pretty foolproof. Again, something you can do, choose to do or choose not to do, is you can actually drop this in like up here. Nothing stopping you doing that. You'll need to use the valid data. Also, if you're going to do that, you should namespace the class. That's something I found out yesterday from Oliver. But the other thing you can do is we can introduce a function here where before each we set this as this valid data. And when we do that, now we can access this from this valid data, which is fine. And the reason I'm doing that is because it would allow us just to convert this to a higher order test if we wanted. So we would just use this expect here. Rid of that. And we'd obviously need to give this, would we? Yes.
Yeah, you need to override.
We need the data set, you're right. So overrides, and we would expect repository exists, which is obviously, we don't need the overrides, but we do want to be in Laravel when we run it. And we can run to defaults. And you still want all of the data, so we'll grab that. Okay. At this point, I would say that every test, more or less, every test in this directory, in this test case, should probably be to do with this data in some way.
Yeah.
Again, it's an argument that you could say yes or no to, but I would probably, if there were other things in the repository I wanted to test down the line, I would probably end up creating a subdirectory in models called repository. and then I would have, for instance, the test name might be changed to from GitHub test.
Yeah.
I would probably go down that line just so that the tests are a little bit more segregated, and everything that's happening in like before each, for example, is only interested in one particular thing.
Yeah. One other thing you can definitely already add to the validator is an ID key.
Okay, yep. That's up here. And what would that be set to? As a valid
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. So it's a long numeric ID.
Okay.
Nothing special.
Fine. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously this is this block completely handled. The next thing is you're saying, look, if it's an organization, then we need to grab the organization from GitHub, which we did in another test case, right?
We haven't did it yet, I think.
Organization test.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It tests it indirectly with this organization method. Yeah.
So if we're changing the type to organization, then it's going to grab the owner as an organization. Let's just skip that one for now, because this is the default from our valid data, right?
Yeah.
So by default, we're going to get a user anyway based on the valid data. I guess the other thing we could do right now is let's write a test that says it throws an invalid argument exception if the owner type is not user or organization. So in this case, we would literally be probably tapping this, and we just want to say repository from GitHub and pass in array merge this valid data, and then owner type, and we'll make the type equal to foobar. Is there an actual valid type in GitHub that's not a user or an organization?
No.
So we would expect that that throws an invalid argument exception. Awesome.
Yeah, and you have a typo, it's user or organization and not of.
Oh yeah, thank you. We could actually even check that the message is correct. You pass that as a second argument. So that would be basically that, right?
No, in square brackets, the foobar.
It still didn't like me, though, did it? I missed something? Let me try getting rid of that. Hates me for writing on repository owner type foobar. Get rid of that. And now it's failing all the time. I must have killed it with something else. What have I done?
Could it be that?
Okay, look at that. That's weird. That was of. Change it to or. Oh,
because you retry all the time. Yeah.
PHP Storm for the win. Okay, let me revert that. Awesome. So yeah, if you're doing the retry on PHP Storm and you have changed the test name, it won't be able to find the test and it will fail. Obviously. Brilliant. So now we're actually checking the message as well, which is nice. Okay, so let's skip past that for now. We'll come back and add something for organization in a moment. If the owner is an instance of user and the data is a fork, is that what we're saying there?
Yeah.
So we can actually just add that to this, right? We can just say fork true.
Yeah. And you should add the fork false to the valid data.
Yeah. Define the array key ID.
Oh, you have to define an ID in the valid data for
The owner.
Yeah, for the owner.
Cool.
Yeah. And Adrian asked if it wasn't possible to assert for an exception at the end. So if you could switch throws and tab.
You can indeed. Yeah, you can indeed. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is actually usually my I skipped over it thinking about other things, but usually my preference, because I prefer to have everything to do with expectations or checks at the end of the test.
My preference is to have it at the top because it reads better. It throws invalid argument exception.
I see that. Yeah, that's certainly a very valid argument. I get that. I was always a little bit like, obviously, if you're writing a proper PHP unit test, let's say that this is the PHP unit test, you have to do this expect exception.
Yeah.
And then the exception type. And every other test will have like this assert equals the bottom of the test.
Yeah.
So I was never a fan of the fact that your eyes had to check that, where usually your eyes are used to checking all of the assertions at the bottom. Like
yeah, your three components of a test, like arrange, act, and assert, switch order. So it is assert, arrange, and act.
Exactly. It makes complete sense logically. Obviously, it's going to throw an exception, so you have to catch that earlier rather than later. But when you're first new to testing, you're like, well, why does everything else have to be at the end, and then everything to do with exceptions has to be at the beginning? It's quite nice that with Pest you do get to say, well, actually, I want to put that at the bottom with all of the expectations. Set up, act, assert, indeed, Adrian. Okay, so if the data is a fork, then we're going to set the block reason to fork. But if it's not a fork, so this is basically only if the user is an organization, right?
Yeah.
And everything else would be block reason review if it's a user.
No, if it starts with a dot. If the name starts with a dot.
Yeah. Yeah. And then because you're doing a safe null check there. Very good. Okay, then you can actually try to create the unique ID is the ID of the data. So there's a test we could do quite easily, which is making sure that you can't create the same repository twice.
Yeah.
It's going to insert all that data there. And then if something fails, which I guess the fail reason, as far as I can see, would basically only be because some of this data was corrupted.
Yeah. If you check what I'm doing in this case, there's only a single line, and it's a language attribute. So language and license are mapped to an enum instance, and I don't have a full list of all available languages already. So I already have a lot if you check this language enum. Yeah, so 400 lines of languages.
Yeah. Nice.
But it still could be set one is missing, and in that case, the enum will throw a bad method call exception. And
okay.
in that case, the creation of the repository will fail, and I will catch it and write it to this log file missing enum values. And I go through this file from time to time and check which enum values I have to add.
Which makes sense. So that bad method call exception will be fired if there is a language that doesn't exist in your enums.
Yeah.
Okay.
But at the end, it's more it returns null if language doesn't exist.
True, yeah,
because the exception is fired but catched and the return is null. So in theory, you could even add it to this first test case we already have.
Very true. So let's go to, I lost it then, but it's right in front of me. Set the language. Do we have valid data language set here? We don't yet, do we?
PHP, for example.
Is it usually like uppercased?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's set the language to something crazy.
String random 64.
You know for certain that there is a language out there that is a random 64 character string. That's going to come up one day, man, and you're going to be like, there's some guy with who always wears sunglasses creating his own DSL somewhere, and yeah, he names it a 64 character code, and you're going to have to you're going to have to add that to the enum. Awesome. So that tests for this, which is nice.
Now we can add the happy path.
Yeah. Who does that? I like to just test all the nasty things. It saves the repository to the owner. The owner's. Sorry, it links the repository to the owner. Okay. So in this case, we will be saying basically repository from GitHub, this valid data. And once we've done that, we would just say expect repository, find one.
I don't like this.
No?
No, I don't like IDs in any code. Because if you have, for example, the MySQL or Postgres driver, the IDs won't reset between test runs, or not between single test cases, but only after every test run. So yeah, repository first, or do a real repository where name or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, we could possibly even look up on that ID, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because this ID would work, exactly.
We've hard-coded that ID, right? So what do we actually call that in the repository? Is it like remote ID?
No, it's just ID.
I see. So you actually set the database ID to the GitHub ID, yeah?
Auto incrementation is disabled and it just has the GitHub IDs, yeah.
Currently we're getting null, which means that obviously at some point the logic for that has failed, which is fine.
Yeah, it could be that some valid data attributes are missing. So the description key, for example.
Yeah. So
the star count.
Yeah, do we even have we have a name. I'm going to put the name at the top. Makes more sense, doesn't it? So description.
Yeah. So, and a full name.
Obviously got 10,000 stars.
The full name is just the owner name slash the repository name. Yeah. And homepage can be null, but you can also add whatever you want. Yeah.
So meta, man. Cool.
And now you get a repository instance.
So back to our happy path. We would expect that to be an instance of them. Well, we don't need to do that because it's going to find it. Let's do a find or fail, because that's going to actually throw an exception in our class, which means we know in our test, which means we know that there is actually a model there. It's never going to be null. And we could just do a few tests. So we could say expect name to be can't remember what we called it, PHP library.
No, so name is gummy beer slash. Yeah, because we assign the full name.
A description is going to be hello world. Suppose the
language to be instance of language.
That's a good one, yeah.
And yeah,
and another good one is license, because that's like you're going inside two arrays there.
Yeah.
Is that MIT lowercase or MIT uppercase?
No, license is also an enum. So license to be instance of license. Or otherwise you could also do a to be or to equal license colon MIT.
Let's do that, because that kind of gives us a little bit of I don't know, almost it's an extra
now you have license in the language.
It's an extra check that that these enums are being calculated correctly as well, without actually writing a test that all those enums work. So
could you run it?
Free validation.
Perfect. So you can use to be also for the license.
Yeah, you are.
We have a great singleton pattern for the enums implemented to be PHP 8.1 future proof.
Yeah, because they're all singletons out of the box, aren't they, in 8.1?
Yeah, and so we had to do something around it. And now if you call license MIT, you will always get the exact same object reference. So you can also do something like license MIT equals equal, so type safe equal, so 3 equals license MIT, for example, and you will get true.
Yeah, no, that's super useful, isn't it? I think what's nice is how close this. Like I was looking at enums literally just yesterday for 8.1, and how close the syntax is in the enum package to how close it is in 8.1 itself.
We did a lot of, well, not a lot, but several of PHP 8.1 compatibility, so polyfills for the other direction.
Yeah.
So you also have access to the try from and from methods. And yeah, so you only have to change the enum itself. So refactor from doc block to the case notation. And in your real code, you only have to change from the methods to the constant like syntax of the future enums. And that's everything you have to change, because we will keep up the package and we also will keep up the Laravel enum wrapper for model attribute casting and request validation and so on. And yeah, this allows you to already use enums now, and with very little changes, you can switch to PHP 8.1 native enums.
That's real nice. That's real nice.
Yeah,
that's going to be so helpful. Yeah.
So it could be if I have some time until PHP 8.1 is released, It could be that I write a rector plugin, for example, PHP rector, that will change all these method notations of your enums to the constant-like ones. So you can call the rector and on your whole code base, and independent if you have one enum in one place or a million enums in 10 million places, it will be done in like a minute.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've not used rector, but certainly it seems possible. It's close enough that it wouldn't actually be a massive job, I don't imagine, to write the script for that.
Yeah.
Give that a little bit of resource path. Of course, yeah. So I have sadly taken that a little bit too far. Yeah, I can't actually think of a way until 8.1. Can't think of a way to do that in higher order because it's failing basically because of the. I know resource path is here, right?
Yeah.
I was okay. Let's just go back a second. Let's at least verify that I am correct in saying it's not possible. I'm going to comment those 2 lines out. Yeah, okay. So something in the enums is obviously performing a some form of like lookup into the container, into Laravel's container.
Oh yes, the language one.
Method. So yeah, if that was commented
if you open the language one, yeah. So you have this values, and here you have the collect JSON decode file get resource path.
Yeah, which is fair dues. I think in that case we just move this back into a standard expectation then. Awesome. Okay, so there's our happy path. We have a happy path that actually checks that a repository is created. I guess the other thing we could do is we could make this, we could continue the chain, but because I'm going to be testing 2 different things, I'm going to bring this out into its own variable. And I will run a bunch of checks on the repository, but then I will say repository owner. And I'll make the owner have its own expectations. Because this owner doesn't exist at the start of this test. So it's actually creating the gummy bear user at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a nice bit of validation at the same time that all works. Which is really nice. Awesome. I'll inline that since we're only doing a single statement.
So you can't have 2 levels of higher order before you do expectations.
Sorry.
So you can't do. So you have the repository in the first expectation, and in theory you could change just owner name to be gummy bear, but I don't know if these 2 levels are possible.
Yeah, they are. So that I specifically went in and refactored the higher order expectation API to support nested. So that does work. I'll show you.
Okay. And you can also do before the owner name check, you can do an owner to be a user. I think we have named it. So one we have, no, not instance of, the custom expectation we have added.
Yeah. Oh, look at that, by the way. I've seen this in the PHP, in the Pest plugin, the latest version. You get completion for your expect extensions.
Perfect.
Which is real nice. Like, I don't know how Oliver did that. Some magic going on there, but yeah, you get a type completion for all of your expect extensions. Awesome. Yeah, that still passes. So I guess what I was saying is, like, if I was going to do a lot of expecting on the user model, I would I would not do this in a single expectation query, and I would break it into two, because I think it kind of starts to become a little bit unreadable. You don't know where one ends and the other begins. But if we're only checking that it's a user and that the name is Gummy Beer, then it's
fine.
Yeah. Okay. It has gone so fast, but it has been 1 3/4 hours on the stream there. That's been awesome, though. That's been fun to kind of really go into something with a lot of logic going on. Well, a fair bit of logic going on, and be able to use some stuff like data sets to loop over and change data slightly and tweak it for every possible scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's been fun. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks everyone who's been kind enough to stay and listen for that long as well. I didn't mean for the stream to go on as long as it has, so I really appreciate that. If you've got any questions, pest-related questions, then be sure to send them to Tom on Twitter. He would love to answer them.
Send them to Nuno. Only call me if you have Opendor-like questions.
No, but it's pretty cool. We're relaxed in the speed at which we're moving here, but to be able to sit back and think of different ways to write tests for something that is already in production is always interesting.
Yeah.
Making sure that you kind of catch every scenario, but still write in a way that is open for extension further down the line and isn't going to completely break down when you go and make a change. So yeah, that's always fun. Yeah. All right. So I assume, I've not actually asked you yet, Tom, but I assume we're good for next week. And we can carry this thing on, probably either look a little bit more into this repository class and add some more tests that are based on repository, or we'll come back up the chain into that job and possibly move along the other jobs. But I will decide that before next week. I'll have a look through and see which one looks more interesting for the stream. As always, I will push this up right now, and this is going to be available in the PR on the Opendor.me GitHub. So if you want to go see the code, if you want to edit the code and suggest a better way of doing things, then go check it out. It is there and available for you to do as you please. But with all that said and done, I'm going to stop sharing that. And I'm going to say goodbye. And thank you very much, Tom, for joining us again.
Thank you and for your time and contributions. And see you again next week. I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Have a nice week, or bye.
I was just going to say one last exciting thing, which hopefully might be there for next week, although no promises, is you mentioned about the repeat functionality in Pest. So this came up on Twitter, but just to kind of show people what we're talking about. Imagine being able to say, like, imagine you're working with a data, like a piece of functionality that does something quite complex, and every so often your CI fails, right? Your continuous integration fails and breaks down, and there's a test that fails on you, and you have no idea why it's failed. And then you run the CI again and it passes. I don't know whether you've ever had that scenario, but I have had that before. So one thing that I'm working on currently for Pest, which would be awesome if we can get it in, is just a repeat function. And you can pass any number into repeat, and the test will be repeated as its own test. So it's not like each test will still get its own instance. It will get its own database set up. So everything will be fresh each time. And it will just run that test X amount of times. And you're going to get like console output that matches as well. So that's what's being worked on. And that will come in super useful, because I have had that situation before where you've forgot to update a fixture somewhere, or there's something that you've not factored in. And yeah, once every blue moon, the test breaks.
Yeah. Or your factory, for example, doesn't 100% match all of your business logic. like, for example, you generate a product price between 0 and 100. And in 1% of the cases, it exactly hits the 0. And you have some special conditions like products have to cost something, or if they don't cost anything, they aren't orderable or whatever things. And now your test breaks. And yeah, this will happen once per year, for example, but you will drive crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it guaranteed it always happens when you've like got a deadline to the next day.
Yeah, always. And in this case, you only hit the CI button, run again. Okay, green. Let's merge it.
Yeah. But it's like one of those things now where instead of having to like run the test and then wait and run it again and then run it again and keep doing that, you're just going to be able to drop a repeat in there, drop however many times you want that test to run. And you can either remove it after you're finished or leave it in there for some assurance. So yeah, that should be coming soon. I've just been, I think, yeah, it was Oliver who suggested that the actual output moved from the description name, which is where I originally put it, into the console output itself. So it's basically handled by the test printer rather than the test suite. So that requires going and creating a PR for Collision, which is like the package that Pest uses to output its pretty text. So yeah, once that's done, then the repeat functionality will go in, and I think that's really nice. So yeah, I've held myself to that now. There we go. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you.
Bye.